Hi, everyone. I'm Stacy Sunletter. Thank you for joining us to watch How to Fight CPS and Win, the New York edition. I have with us a special guest today, Dennis Hannon, who is a father here to share his story about what happened with his son and CPS involvement, their response to the situation or lack thereof, and some background how CPS didn't help him, and in fact, how the courts seemed to fail him and his child as well. Without further notice, Dennis, would you like to introduce yourself, say a little bit about your background, and how you came to this situation?
Yeah, so my name is Dennis. I'm a dad first and foremost. The title I'm most proud of. I've held various roles in engineering, own my own home, work a regular job. I'm just a regular guy, really. I've had a background in some FBI clandestine work. I was a confidential human source for approximately 3 years with a background in human trafficking and children that were victims of violent crimes. Clean criminal record, don't do drugs, drink maybe a beer on a weekend with friends if I want to. But that's pretty much it. I spend a lot of my time doing nerd stuff and just enjoying time with my son. So that's my.
And when you say you worked for the FBI and you did human trafficking work, who did you find any certain population that was more inclined to traffic children, like certain job profile or?
Yeah, it's interesting because I spent 3 years with the FBI, and we had tons of leads that should have brought indictments. Unfortunately, in the 3 years that I worked with them, none of my work resulted in a single indictment. The majority of the people that I ended up unmasking that were behind grooming rings, pedophilia, child porn rings, and even beyond that, because you had actually photos of people committing the acts, so you can put the two and two together. They were all people of power. They were judges, they were attorneys, they were politicians, um, people with money, very affluent. These were what on the outside would be considered to be well-respected people with families and regular jobs that you wouldn't have thought for a second that they were involved in any of that. Just to be clear, there was no mistaking this. I mean, I unmasked these people. There was no doubt in their identity. It was bulletproof. It was 100%. And not to mention, these people had no business being where they were unless that was their thing, right? I specialized on the deep web. And what I did was I built a search engine for the FBI to collect all of this information so that they could search through it like a Google. And we could see what was trending, and we could be ahead of all of the pedophilia rings as they popped up, and so that we weren't the last to know after the fact. And we used that to gather information on these people, and we would gather like usernames and passwords that they used on sites, and then we would call it door knocking, and then we would try those credentials on, say, email accounts, because people are creatures of habit and they typically don't change their email password. It's one password for everything that they use, and we would then try to gain access to other things that they own. So, there was no hiding it. There was no getting around it. It was they were caught red-handed.
So why did you leave the FBI?
I left the FBI, well, one, because I felt like the work that I was doing was pointless because it wasn't resulting in any real indictments. I felt like I was cut up by bureaucracy. When I had a handler, the gentleman is retired now. He's former CIA, and he was shifted after the 9/11 controversy. A big article came out about him and about how he received emails that could have prevented the attacks on 9/11, but chose to do nothing. And what happened was they reassigned him. He ended up getting assigned to the Buffalo FBI field office, and he was my handler for a while there. And so I worked with him hand in hand. I think I might have got off track in your original question there, but that was, and basically what I would do is the attorney general or a district attorney, maybe an ADA, I don't know, I didn't really care about the terms they used. They would give me a script of the laws that I could break. And I had an alias with the FBI. I signed paperwork with the FBI. All of the work that I did was under the alias Grand, Grand. So whenever I signed any paperwork with the FBI, whenever I did anything with the FBI, we would meet in a public place. It was always two agents at a time, or a local law enforcement official that was dressed undercover in regular street attire. And they would basically say, here are the things that you're allowed to do, the laws that you're allowed to break, what you can do, what you can't do. And I would pack up. The night before, they would give me a location, and I would pack up all of my gear, all of my computer equipment and luggage, and we would go in hotel rooms and we would do sting operations. And they would hover over me, and they would watch what I was doing, and they would make sure that I was in compliance. And we would do just that, sting operations. We would be what I called it, the gutter of the internet, because that's pretty much what it was the gutter. Um,
So basically, you left because their response to pedophilia was underwhelming. There were very few indictments, and so
yeah,
you
yeah, and
found it
and
disappointing.
absolutely, and even worse than that, and I can only speculate, but I believe that the motive really behind it was more sinister than that. I believe that they used the idea, they knew that human trafficking and pedophilia was very near and dear to my heart because I was a victim of a violent sexual crime when I was younger, about 8 years old. And so for me to have the opportunity, one, to serve my country in a way that I could use my knowledge and my skill set to do so, but then also help protect kids from the same things that I went through, that spoke to me. And I was willing to sacrifice everything that I could to fulfill that mission. And it was my opinion, after about a year or two in, that they really weren't using that information to catch pedophiles. What they were doing was they were using my work because I could use that to target specific people and unmask them on the deep web where all of these crimes were being committed. And it's my belief that they used that technique that I used to target people so that they could target everyday average American citizens and any kind of dissenting voice. Because ultimately, I built them a search engine, and the search engine wasn't collecting just pedophilia stuff at the end. That's what it started at. But what it ended up being at the end was a huge dragnet. And I did warrantless snooping on millions of Americans. I'm talking email, passwords, credit cards. I collected Bitcoin addresses for transactions, anything that we could find. And there was so much data that I had to build a search engine in order to sift through it so that they could find what they wanted. But it started as pedophilia and human trafficking, and it ended as a giant dragnet where we would just collect anything that we could about everyone. That was it.
So the irony to all this is you were working in this field, going after traffickers, and now you have your own situation that happened to you,
Yeah.
and it's not so necessarily what you were going after, but it's still horrific. If you want to kind of describe your situation that you're in with your family.
Yeah, as far as my son, is that what you're referring to? Yeah. So I've been fighting for a very long. So I should roll back. It's hard for me to even know where to begin with this, but ultimately, at about I can speculate it started between 2 to 3, but I didn't find out about it until about 4 to 5. Really, how bad things were. My ex-wife transitioned my son into a girl starting at ages 4 to 5, and the school administration, the staff, doctors, therapists were all in on this, and they effectively hid it from me. I was the last to know. In a unilateral gender conversion of my son that started at age 4 to 5, in which they changed his name and they started referring to him exclusively as female pronouns. Even had him referred to a Dr. Tran, who, the real name, I'm not making this up, I don't know if it's a whatever, Dr. Tran, wanted to give my son puberty blockers, and Dr. Tran was an endocrinologist at the University of Rochester. And over a 45-minute phone call, having never met or spoken to my child, they thought that he was a candidate for puberty blockers, and rubber stamped a diagnosis of gender dysphoria on him. They never spoke to the child because the mother stated that the child was shy, and she didn't know how he would react to that. So,
If I can just interject,
go ahead.
Dennis,
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm a physician assistant, and in New York State, we would consider that this has the appearance of medical fraud to me. If you can't examine your patient, you cannot opine. You cannot create a diagnosis. You have to talk to the patient. If you don't talk to the patient or see the patient in some way, you need to say, I'm sorry, if your son is too shy and won't talk to me, I cannot, diagnose your son. So this has already the appearance of fraud. And I think there was some other counselor too. There was something about not keeping medical records, because
Yeah,
that has an appearance of fraud too.
right. So Dr. Tran was involved because there was a therapist by the name of Andrea Binner, who goes by Andy Binner. Andrea Binner was the therapist who kept no notes because I subpoenaed her for all of her records relating to the visits and appointments of my child. She kept no notes of any visits. She said that the child persisted and was consistent with wanting to be a excuse me, a girl. So what Miss Benner did was she referred my child to Dr. Tran, and that's how he was fast tracked on the path to puberty blockers.
Just so that your audience understands, um, do you have any gay friends or trans friends?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have tons of gay friends, tons of trans friends. I talk to them all the time. Actually, one of my best friends in high school, I was just talking to him yesterday. I was commenting on his Facebook stuff. Awesome friend of mine. We were friends before he came out in school, and he came out, and I'm like, yeah, so what, dude? Like, whatever. I mean, that's, thanks for, feeling like you can be, open with me about that. I appreciate it, but, can we get back to the game of beer pong? We were young. We were in our late teens, right? And I'm like, didn't matter to me then, didn't matter to me now. And I've actually, he reached out to me. He recently got in the IT field, and I've been coaching him and mentoring him. And whenever he's in a pickle at work with his new IT job and he's got to fake it till he makes it, I'm usually the guy he calls. And as far as trans friends, I have quite a few trans friends. I actually had one friend of mine who's my hairdresser was trans, and she fell on hard times. And I actually let her live with me in one of my spare rooms until she could get her feet back up on the ground. And if you're watching this, I'd really appreciate it if you get the stuff out of my basement still. So I'm still storing her stuff down there.
So your friends that are gay and trans, do they know your story?
Yeah, absolutely, and it disgusts them.
And what do
Because
they? Yeah, okay, yeah, go ahead.
it absolutely disgusts them because the community is the trans and LGBTQ community is generally very loving and accepting, but you have a lot of these extremists that are a part of that community, and they're using it almost as like a umbrella or a shield for them to be able to do whatever they want, with impunity. And it disgusts them because I've had conversations with one of my best friends from high school who came out, right? And it really bothers him because it reflects poorly on that community. And I know that that's not what he's about. I know that that's not what the majority of that trans community is about. And I know that a lot of them reject these radical ideologies and grooming that are being pushed. And they're afraid. They're afraid to speak out against it because, they become outcasts in a community that is supposed to be inclusive to them and accepting of different beliefs and viewpoints. And my own friends who I would do anything for, they are scared to share that opinion, which I think is very ironic within some people in their community because of the fear of retribution. And it's
And
unfortunate.
if anyone should be sensitive, right? Um, it's doubly alarming that they feel scared to speak up, because if you think about the double standard, they feel it's so abusive if you refuse to refuse to accept that they're gay or refuse to accept that they're trans. So the double standard there is it's equally harmful and disturbing to a child to force them to be a sex that they are not. So that they're scared to speak up from their own experiences, and whereas shows that it's doubly that bad to and they're doubly that scared to speak
It's
about it.
even worse. It's even worse if you're in that community and you speak up, because then you're a traitor, right?
Right.
Right.
And
For me,
it shouldn't be that way. It should
right.
be
Exactly. Sorry, go ahead.
no, it should be what is, and everybody should just proceed accordingly, right? Not force something, deny something. It should just be what is.
Right. Arguably, if I identified as trans or if I identified as a gay male, and I spoke up against some of the things that were going on in the LGBT community as it relates to grooming and pedophilia, and just sexualized acts in front of children, and just inappropriate things in front of these kids, I would be at a much greater risk for retribution than if I weren't in that community. Right. And
Right. So in other words, if you're saying, like, when you reference the drag queen shows, as long as it's in front of adults and what have you, but they're bordering in some of these shows on lewd conduct in front of children.
Absolutely.
That if you or I did it, we would be arrested, but for them it's to be accepted in front of children, which is another double standard. What's your opinion on that?
We should be arrested for that.
Right. And
Right?
so
I mean,
should
that's
anyone
like,
else, right?
absolutely. But in that environment and setting, what makes it so dangerous is not only do you not have to worry about that, you're doing so with impunity, and you don't have to worry about any kind of legal repercussions, but it's celebrated, it's encouraged.
But yet it's grooming.
Right.
Do you know if your ex takes your son to any of these events?
She absolutely does, and she continues to, which is very interesting because she has never taken him to a story hour at the library. And there's nothing wrong with story hours at the library. I'm all about reading. The only time he goes to a story hour is when a drag queen is hosting it. Why is that?
Was CPS ever involved in your case?
CPS was involved.
So what happened?
I was actually I don't know who filed the claim still to this day, but a CPS claim was made because somebody, I'm assuming a parent at the school, was not happy with my child showing up to school wearing a full dress, hair done up, makeup, tights, little shoes, every accoutrement you can think of for a little girl. A parent found something wrong with that. God bless them. Rightfully so, they did. They reported it. I was actually named in the CPS indication, as I don't know what you would call it, a party, an involved party, because they said that I was complicit in this, and I'm like, I was never complicit in this because I never knew. If I knew, I am not okay with this, and that ultimately went nowhere. And I believe that there was one more after that too, but it was and so none of them ever went anywhere.
So just to be clear, because you said indicated, you were never found to be complicit with this, because you said you weren't even aware it was going on. You just meant that you were named in the report but not indicated,
Sorry.
correct?
I might have used the wrong terminology.
That's okay.
For that,
I just want to make sure the right things.
Thankfully, I don't have a lot of experience with CPS.
But
I was named as somebody responsible in that report to CPS, and I was kicking and screaming, no way, I let them in my house, they checked everything, looked where he slept and let him through my house, and then that was it, and nothing happened.
But to go back to double standards, because they will remove children from parents if they don't accept a child being gay or what have you, and there's all this legislation occurring. I think, was it in what state was it just recently? I think Washington. If your child runs away, nobody's going to tell you, even if they know where they are, and you can't even subpoena if they want a sex change. right?
Yeah,
So
sanctuary cities are popping up. I think Michigan is one of them, in California. It's it's funny because these radical policies start out west and they slowly start moving their way.
So they call that child abuse when you don't recognize your child is gay
Yeah.
or wants to change their gender. But when a parent is forced converting a child, did CPS intervene at all and help your child?
No, not at all. They did nothing. Okay. And so, well, let me backtrack a little bit, because when the Dr. Tran thing happened, there was no DSM-5 criteria that was followed to diagnose the child with gender dysphoria before they recommended puberty blockers. Okay. They were doing at the time affirming care, meaning they were affirming this idea that the child identified as female, having never officially diagnosed him using any DSM-5 criteria. There weren't even notes on the child that were kept, right? And the Dr. Tran thing was a 45-minute phone call. He went to Andrea Binner, I think maybe like a year or two or a couple of years prior to Dr. Tran, no notes at all. Um, he never met the criteria. And then what happened after was the courts wanted to do a watchful waiting, which is where you have to pay an enormous amount of money. I had to pay $145 a session, once a week if I could. I was court mandated to take him to this gender therapist, and they watchfully waited to see a sign of gender dysphoria until he met that DSM-5 criteria, so that he could then be fast tracked and proceed on to medical progression. And I say progression loosely because I wouldn't consider that progression, but that's what they would call it, is medical progression. So he was in there, caught up in the system, and my attorney and I had to approach this very carefully, because if I rejected that treatment, if I said hell no, if I said no way, there's no reason to believe, there's no evidence to support the fact that the child has, or the idea that the child has gender dysphoria, I would lose medical authority. I could actually have my child taken away from me, because I would be then considered resistant, or impeding uh, critical medical care. So
Critical medical care with no records
yes,
and a phone call that didn't examine your child.
yes, and actually in court, I objected to this, and they asked me, they go, Mr. Hannon, isn't it true that the first thing you would do if you were granted sole custody of this child is remove him from the gender therapy appointments that he's going to? And I, without hesitation, said absolutely. And they said, why is that? And I said, because I don't believe in a treatment plan before a diagnosis. And they said, but you're not a doctor, are you, Mr. Hannon? And I said, no, that's just, to me, common sense. It should be.
Already your story is very outrageous to me.
Yeah.
Like I said, as a physician assistant, the lack of medical records, the lack of examining your child and coming up with a diagnosis, and most profoundly is that this was secreted from you, because concealing something from a parent, to me, involving their child, is fraud. It's fraud by concealment. Um, and I personally couldn't imagine receiving a letter from a school referring to my child with a different gender, um, and the horror and shock that would probably be like to the core that in that moment.
And for your
Um,
audience, that's how it started, right? For people that don't know the story, that don't know the history of this, that's how it started. Was I got a letter in the mail addressed to the parent or guardian of, followed by a female name that I didn't recognize. And I opened the envelope because it was my son's school, and it was mailed to the right address. And that was when I discovered that they were referring to my child by the name Ruby. I don't know who Ruby is. Ruby Rose, that was the name that they chose, that they assigned to my child. I didn't choose that. I wasn't aware of this name. They used all female pronouns. I was the last to know. And that was how this started. And then through court proceedings, that was how I found out about Andrea Binner, Dr. Tran, all that. And it was just, oh my God, it was, you want to know, but then the more you know, um, a lot of sleepless nights, we'll put it that way.
yeah, that's horrible.
It was rough.
But your story gets even more horrible because while this is going on, and just to kind of circle back to CPS a little bit, when this report sort of made, questioned your involvement, but were there in court, some things kind of came up that you had to get a court order to stop the mother from doing. Can you describe some of the things that took place there?
Yeah, absolutely. The mother was showering with the child when he was about 7 years old, um, with him naked, obviously, in the shower. She was sleeping with him, and the daycare director of a daycare in Kenmore town of Tonawanda called Tiny Treasures, the director at that daycare was sleeping with my son and the mother in bed in what they described as a ruby sandwich with my son in the middle. And they would dress my son in a dress, so he would be dressed as a female, and they would sandwich him in the middle. Um, and this revelation actually came out through a therapy session between the child and the therapist. And that therapist never reported that to CPS. The therapist actually was the gender therapist who I was court ordered to take him to at $145 a session once a week. Okay. And we only found out about that because we asked an update from the court. And so that was a month after the fact that she told us about it. And it was only because my attorney at the time said, "Hey, we need an update. What's going on?" Had we not asked, we wouldn't have known. But as somebody who I think is the mandatory reporter, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that terminology, she did not report it to anybody. Disgusting. So, needless to say, my son is ordered not to attend Tiny Treasures daycare in Kenmore, and I urge all parents, if you have a kid there, pull them out.
So, what did this feel like to you? Did you feel like this is child grooming? Like,
It was worse than that. It started out as grooming, and it went straight into pedophilia. I I don't know how else to say it. You're showering with a 7-year-old. You're dressing them up, a boy, in dresses and accoutrements and anything that a little girl would wear, and then you're having a sandwich with them from a daycare director. Come on, that these are people that we trust with our kids. They're working with other kids. If they're doing that to my son, what are they doing to your child?
I personally remember raising my children. And you know my story, but um, I specifically remember when my daughter turned 3, saying to the father, "You need to stop showering around her, being naked around her, because at 3, I remember things from when I was 3.
Yeah,
So I don't want your images burned into her retina. So
yeah,
at 3, you got to stop." So
yeah.
at 5, when I saw something happen, I was out of my skin too. And so 7, to me, when I started talking to my spouse at the age when the child was 3, 7, no, no. Maybe in other countries there's familial nudity, and it is culturally accepted, but no, not in America that I know of.
No, no. And what benefit? What becomes of that?
Right.
Right. Every time I do something as a parent, I ask myself, what good is going to become of this? Right. And then equally as important, what bad could become of this? And I can't think of one good reason to shower naked with your 7-year-old, or to have a ruby, or to have a sandwich with your child between another adult. That's weird. At the very least, it's weird.
Did throughout your marriage or time, while she was, while you lived together, was there anything else that ever occurred that shed light on maybe her mental state? Any allegations of things? Anything ever happened like that?
Yeah, looking back, there were quite a few. It's tough to even know where to begin with that. But I when this started, Okay. When my son was born, she really demanded that we use gender neutral pronouns, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense. I don't see why we should do that. But whatever. And as time got on, she got more radical with these beliefs and what she wanted to do. And I honestly, I had a sister who went through postpartum depression really bad, and I figured maybe it was, like an imbalance or something like that. And I wanted to chalk it up to something that it was out of her control. I think I was trying to make excuses for these kind of behaviors early on. And it just progressed. At one point, when I told her I wanted a divorce and this isn't going to work out anymore, she actually filed a false rape claim. I was a suspect in a second-degree rape case in which she said that she was raped at knife point while visiting her father's grave. And that just about destroyed my reputation. I was looked at as a rapo, a second-degree rape suspect. I was getting picked up at work by detectives that damaged my reputation at work. It hurt me. I would get picked up by detectives and they do that thing you see on TV where they adjust the mirror and you can see them looking at you in the back seat and they'd interrogate me. And then come to find out she made the whole thing up because she wanted attention and she was slapped on the wrist with filing a false police report. And like for somebody to go through those lengths, she made up such an elaborate story, even beat herself up, bruised herself, beat herself up, muddied herself up. She had sticks in her hair to actually make it seem like she was raped, and it was all just made up. So when you're dealing with somebody that's willing to go to such lengths like that, that's a dangerous person.
So I think, because I think I saw the report too, she didn't name you as a suspect. I think she claimed it was a stranger rape, right? But that just made you a suspect, or how did that go?
I wasn't, she didn't specifically name me, but the description matched me, and they thought that it was me because it was right after I announced that I wanted a divorce.
So just to look into this a little bit further too, what's is there anyone else in her family that's kind of doing this as well, or is this just an isolated thing with her?
No, her at the time that she started transitioning my son into a girl, her sister transitioned into a boy, and I mean full transition. Um, you would never know that she's a biological female. So the odds of this happening in parallel, right? What are the odds of that you would have that happening simultaneously? Um, so that happened at the same time, and her sister is now her brother.
So what does your son say about all of this?
Well, now he's older, right? And he understands. He has a voice, so he can say what he wants and what he doesn't want. When this was first happening, he didn't have a voice. Nobody could speak for him. Quite the opposite. Nobody would speak to him, right? As we saw with Dr. Tran, nobody would speak to him because the mother used the excuse that he was too shy and he didn't want to speak to anybody. He wasn't shy enough to be what she considered consistent and persistent with his gender identity. But he was too shy to speak to anybody about it. Not too shy to wear dresses, dress up like that, but too shy to speak to a doctor about it. And that really kind of goes to show you that it was purely influence.
When doctors, did you freeze? I think you froze, or maybe it's me. Oh, there you are. When doctors talked to your son, though, when they actually did talk to your son, um, how did he identify himself?
A boy, and I was actually court ordered to give him both options, if you can believe that. I was court ordered not only to take him to a gender therapist, but I had to give him both options. We actually had a backpack called a special backpack. It was a safe space, they called it, where he could have tights and girl stuff and this and that. And I had to give him both options, and that was to go back and forth between both of the houses. He wanted nothing to do with it. I tried it. I'm compliant. I believe in the system, so I would give him both options and take him through the girls section. He wanted nothing to do with that. He's all boy. He never, even now, right? He spent a year and a half with a gender therapist, And after a year and a half of gender therapy, um, he was never diagnosed. He never met the DSM-5 criteria. But yet, as soon as I pulled him out of that therapy, they tried taking away my sole medical decision-making power, and they did, and they were successful in that. So he was in there for a gender therapist for a year and a half, no diagnosis of gender dysphoria. I had sole medical authority at the time because of the stuff that she did to him. I was awarded that. The moment I took him out of that therapist, I lost my sole medical authority.
So we're getting some comments from M. Young, and I wanted to, yes, touch upon what she just. I'm assuming it's a she, but it could be an. Actually, it's too small. I can't see. It could be a man
I
too.
can't see her. My eyes
Yeah.
aren't so good anymore.
But the question was, can a child that young make this decision? What's your thought on a child as young as maybe 3, 4? Maybe I've even heard you say sometimes you might have even started it too.
Yeah,
Your ex-wife
yeah.
is doing this.
I can speculate it started at 2 to 3, but really ramped up 4 to 5. My opinion is if they're not old enough to determine what parent they want to live with, they're probably not old enough to determine their gender. These are lifelong consequences. Okay, the number one puberty blocker prescribed in America is Lupron. And if you look at the package insert, we know the dangers of that. That was first given to violent sexual offenders in prison as a form of chemical castration to curb their sexual impulses. Okay, we know it lowers their bone density, it causes all kinds of issues. They may never be able to experience an orgasm for the rest of their life. They'll never, sometimes it stunts them. These are serious things that a child, they don't know. Okay, if you were to ask my son what he wanted to be, he'd probably tell you a Power Ranger one day and then Alexander Hamilton the next. My son is identified as pretty much every Marvel comic book hero. Okay.
And Lucas Skywalker too, right?
Absolutely. Today I just showed you a picture. He was a ninja. Like
do you know
so.
what the Oedipus complex is? Another comment brought that up. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't know what that is.
So I'm not too sure of the story because this goes way, way back. But Oedipus Rex, when he was a child, he was told that he was going to have an affair with his mother someday. And he got lost. He didn't even know who his mom was. And then ultimately that came true. So they refer to Oedipus Rex, that situation, when a parent is trying to make a child have a relationship with them, an emotionally dependent situation, possibly pedophilia. So that's called the Oedipus complex that somebody just brought up. So I just didn't know if you knew what that was.
Because I always see, I'm not a medical guy, so I don't, sometimes, and Stacy keeps me honest because sometimes I'll use terminology and I think I know what the meaning is, but then the meaning is something completely different. So I just try to err on the side of caution and just tell my story for what it is and share that experience. But to me, it was, I always described it as a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? That you wanted something to become true so bad that you would do whatever it took for that to become true. And that's exactly what I saw here.
Recently, I think, I hope you're okay talking about this, but does it seem like there's some kind of rejection going on there because he didn't choose to be a girl?
Yeah, I think, yeah, rejection as far as the child with the mother, or vice versa, or both.
You can talk about either or both because I'm
Yeah,
sure both have their feelings.
yeah. So, I describe raising children as control is like trying to grab water. The tighter you squeeze, the more that slips between your fingers. And I lost. So for your audience, I took my case all the way to Supreme Court trial in front of Judge Daniel Furlong, and not only did I lose custody, but I lost sole medical decision making power. But I won in many other ways because my child has a voice. He's adamant about what he wants and what he doesn't want, and he is a very strong little boy, and I admire him and his strength and his courage so much. But because of that, He's, his mom treats him differently. Um, she tries to have a tighter control and a grip over him, and the more she does that, the more she drives a wedge between her relationship with him, because he's very resentful. He understands now, because you have kids in school and they say, "Weren't you a girl named Ruby?" Right? Weren't you this? Weren't you that? And these kids ask questions. It's confusing. It's confusing to me, right? And I always say this, I'm an adult and I'm confused about this whole situation. So when you have kids in school where one day you're one person and then the next day you're the next, that follows him for the rest of his life. Okay. I'm not going to show the pictures here because I'm afraid that they'll be used against me like they use everything else to take away my time with my son. But Stacy, you've seen the pictures of what they did to my little boy at about 4 to 5, and those pictures aren't going away. Okay, she had them in pageants, public pageants, beauty pageants on display for the whole world. When my son gets older and he looks through baby pictures and maybe he gets married or finds a significant other, it's a very difficult conversation to have. How in this picture he's a girl, in the next picture he's not.
That
What?
that's the double standard there again too, because we've also discussed First Amendment rights and your right to post on social media. You blur out your son's face and what have you, but you have a right, to expose the situation. And honestly, New York State municipal or public officers law or municipal law, the public has the right to know how our agencies are performing. So CPS did nothing. The public has the right to know. Judge Furlong took away medical custody, gave sole custody to a parent who appears to be forced converting her son to be a girl. The public has the right to know this stuff, and you have First Amendment rights to post about this, right? As long as you're not causing severe damage to anybody. And I think it was also even testified to in court that there's no severe damage. Yet they take this and come after you to restrict your parenting access, but yet I believe you told me you took the pictures right from her social media.
Yeah, I didn't have social media at the time. I went 8, 9 years without social media, and I just got back into social media because I needed to build a support base. This is a very lonely thing when you're battling this on your own, and I've been thankful to meet wonderful people like yourself, Stacy, and everybody else in this podcast. Right, I wouldn't be here if I didn't get on social media, so that was something that I had to do. But all of those pictures that I posted, so I launched a campaign called Justice For, and then followed by my son's name. And I took pictures right from my ex-wife's Facebook and pictures that were taken in a public setting like beauty pageants, okay, where my son was dressed up as a girl, makeup, the whole nine. Not only was I threatened with getting my visitation taken away by none other than dishonorable Daniel Furlong of Supreme Court, but I was threatened with jail. They were going to throw me in jail for 30 days, okay, over this. If I didn't take that website down, they were going to throw me in jail.
And they keep
And
using it
always,
against you, because now
they
you have to
can't
pay
point in jail
attorneys.
every month because these
Yeah.
people.
Well, now you have to pay her attorney fees too, because,
Yeah.
oh, you posted on social media, even though your images came from hers.
Yep. I have to pay $19,000 in 1 year, within 1 year of her attorney fees, because I posted pictures that were publicly available on social media, which goes to show you folks, it wasn't the pictures that were the problem. It was the context in which they were used because it was against the narrative. If I had posted those pictures and I said, "Oh, look at my sweet little girl who transitioned and she's a poster child for pride, right? And look at her and let's all celebrate my 5 year old's transition," and use those pictures, that would have been fine. That would have been celebrated. But the fact I said, "What the hell is this? This is abuse. We need to do better as America than allow this to happen," because I used it in that context. That was the problem. At no point, and it was argued, was that child in any immediate physical, emotional, or mental danger. And that's why they actually tried to limit me to supervised access only. And guess what? It wasn't even the opposing counsel who filed the order to show cause on that. That was the attorney for the child. I had two order to show causes, I was fighting against that. They wanted me to do because of that Justice for, followed by my son's name, website. They wanted me to have supervised access only at one of those supervision centers.
So, like I said, like to me, this would be just to the core horrific to experience. Get that letter from school, then do discovery, recent updates, and find out there's this Ruby sandwich and this woman bathing naked in front of your 7-year-old son. All this is horrific. And then the whipped cream and cherry on top is you have to pay for her attorney's fees as well to do all this.
Yeah, these people have effectively financially destroyed me. But I can tell your audience there's one good thing about having everything taken away from you, and everything that you've worked for is you become fearless because then you have nothing to lose. And when you have nothing to lose, they seem to lose interest because they'll just go on to the next person to bleed.
It's true. It's true. Just a little bit more. So, Judge Daniel Furlong in Erie, Niagara County, New York, Supreme Court judge, he gave custody to this parent that appears to be force converting your son, who was doing the Ruby sandwich, was showering in front of your son, who takes him to drag queen shows, possibly with lewd conduct in front of children, which is another form of child abuse. And Judge Daniel Furlong gave that person custody over you.
Yeah, and I also want to call it the Children's Legal Center of Buffalo, or Western New York Children's Legal Center of Buffalo, where the AFC Daniel Freck was the director, which now he works for CPS. Great. He did nothing. He was supposed to be a unbiased advocate for the best interests of my child, and he went along with this. He actually was on the defendant's side. He was named as a defendant. He wanted to award sole custody to the mom. Every time I spoke out against this, he was right there with his order to show causes. He actually injected himself as a witness in this case by influencing his medical treatment plan behind closed doors so that so that my child would affirm as a female. And nothing happened to him. And then he moved on to CPS, so Children's Legal Center.
So Freck, correct me if I'm wrong, was the attorney for children who petitioned for you to be supervised, correct? That's the same guy?
Yep, that's the same guy.
And you're the protective guy saying, no, I need a court order. Somebody should not be grooming my child, being naked in front of him in the shower. No, there shouldn't be this lesbian Ruby sandwich with my son in the middle. You're doing these protective things, but this guy was going to court for you to be supervised with your son, and now he's an attorney for Erie County CPS in the state of New York. Is that so?
That is correct.
And you know the story about Nicholas D'Angelo?
I do.
And so he was an attorney for Niagara County CPS, hired, despite it being public knowledge, he was a sex offender. And he was an attorney for Niagara County CPS. And now you see something like this going on over in Erie County where, there's this apparent grooming going on, but you should be the one supervised, not the grooming parent.
Yeah, in the FBI, we had a saying for this. We called it one time was a one-off, second is a coincidence, three times is a pattern. And I see a lot of patterns in here.
Yes. So did you do anything today to celebrate the 4th of July?
Heck yeah. We went and saw The Sound of Freedom.
And what did you think?
It was moving. It was a first of all, phenomenal movie. The cast was terrific. Very well done, well put together. Production was fantastic. It was hard. It was hard for me. I didn't know. In the beginning. I didn't know if I could make it through the whole thing because it brought back some things that I experienced and witnessed in my time as a confidential human source with the FBI, and I was ready to cry or walk out, but I stuck through it, and I'm glad I did. But it was a great movie. I highly recommend it. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's going to be playing in the next couple months in theaters. I can only speak to the first part of the movie, and I don't want to talk about it and give it away to anybody that hasn't seen it. But the part that I saw and the role that I played with the FBI field office out of Buffalo was very accurate in the
So
beginning.
the movie mostly took place in other countries and detailed on human trafficking, child sex trafficking in other countries. And so at first I was kind of like, well, how does this, bring home a message to us in America, in the United States? And thankfully, at the end of the movie, after watching all this, at the end of the movie, they disclosed these facts that child sex trafficking is a $150 billion industry in the world in a year, and they said it's worst in the U.S.
Yep. They might have actually called it the hub.
The hub.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I don't know if
horrific.
that was what they used, but it was something like that.
That's horrific. So you see what's going on in other countries and you think, oh, but then at the end it's like, no, it's worse here. And so when you see these attorneys punishing the safe protective parent and wanting the safe protective parent to have um, that they're supervised, and it gives such an appearance that, oh, you're so horrible, you need to be supervised, nobody wants to listen to you or your story, because already they have in their mind something's wrong, this person's supervised, but it's actually opposite, right? These perpetrators working in our government agencies that are supposed to be protecting children appear to be doing exactly the opposite. You can't deny it when you have Nicholas D'Angelo, who was hired with public knowledge he's a sex offender, now pleading guilty to 8 felony charges of rape. One of the victims was a 16-year-old, and our government gives him 6 months in jail. And now you have this other guy who was punishing you. Now he's Erie County CPS in the state of New York. So it's very concerning when you see this, and you point out that it's a pattern. And there's a study by the U.S. Department of State, our own government, on human trafficking in the world. And it was published in June of 2019. And it said it said for other countries how they traffic children, what have you, but it said for us in the United States, the most common way a child enters child sex trafficking is through the foster care system. And now you have this pattern of attorneys securing positions with CPS. Would you agree that's a problem?
Yeah, that's absolutely a problem. These people are in positions, trusted positions of power to protect the innocent, to protect the weak, to protect the vulnerable, and they are the predator. That's unfathomable. Nobody wants, and I think part of it is nobody wants to think that. I didn't want to think that. If I didn't go through this, I wouldn't even want to hear about it because I wouldn't want to think that that existed, but it does. Um, it does exist, and it's troubling, and all we can do is expose.
Do you think it's any accident that Furlong gave this parent custody over you?
I don't believe in accidents. I believe that everything from the beginning was very calculated.
A predetermined narrative?
Absolutely. I mean, even from the time I lost my job, I lost my job and he denied my petition to modify child support so that my situation would become so dire that even on paper, because I own a house, I have a good job, I have this and that even on paper, then I wouldn't be seen as a favorable parent because of those things. It was all when I believe that in my heart. That this was all really predetermined from the start.
I've done a lot of these stories, interviews. I have my own experience. I've been involved with all this for 10 years now, as many of the listeners know. And for those who don't, my ex was an attorney with Child Protective Services in Niagara County, New York, just like Nicholas D'Angelo. And my children disclosed sex abuse and strangulation, and they gave my ex custody. And he still has custody despite 4 CPS indications from a neighboring agency. So my experiences and all these people I'm talking to, including yourself and others and interviews that I'm doing, it really just seems that The courts have learned that when they give custody to the abuser, it creates chaos. And the safe parent fights and fights and fights, funneling money into the system. And I feel as though judges are not viewed by their ethical decision making, their integrity, or how often their decisions are upheld. To me, I feel judges are viewed by their employer the same way you or I would be viewed by our employer, is how much money do you make? How much money do you bring in for your job? So when they are sparking couples to fight and fight and stay in the system and funnel money into the system, um, they're doing that just to exploit us and children at the expense of children. So it seems like Judge Furlong's decisions, because he was also the judge in my situation that gave my ex custody, that no matter how much you complain to the judicial commission, he doesn't get in trouble. He even called my kids' counselors and told them to ignore any medical evidence of sexual abuse. They don't get in trouble for this. And that was an ex parte communication. They don't get in trouble because when they're viewed, it appears to me, when they're viewed by the judicial commission, they're looking at the dollars and cents. How much is this judge making? Well, so if your situation was to be reviewed, they would give him a pat on the shoulder, possibly because he's making so much money for the state by doing this and causing people to have to keep fighting. That's kind of what I think. It's cash for kids. It's it's whatever decision is going to make more money for the state and for the little racket of supervisors and these therapists charging $145 a session. It's all like a racket, and it's not for the best interest of children.
Yeah, gender dysphoria is their business model.
Yeah, and
right. And let's talk about the facts with that. 88% of the kids, according to Zucker, Singh, and Bradley, I think in 2020, and there's another follow-up study later on, 88% of the children that experience gender dysphoria desist back to their original gender. If they're socially transitioned, only 6% desist. It's purely influence. It's a racket. It's money. That's all it is, and keeping them in that system. And I think the movie Sound of Freedom touched on this very briefly. There was a phrase in there where they mentioned chaos and money.
Yes, they did. Yep.
And that's what it is there is no money without chaos.
And then when they damage our children, it's job security for in the future and the next generation and the next generation. Yeah. I feel like there was one more thing I wanted to touch on, but I don't super remember what it is. But I do. I remember. Yeah. Did you find court watchers instrumental in your situation?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even just the emotional support. I mean, don't get me wrong, I got a lot of laughs on it too, because you are not liked, to say the least, by Judge Furlong. But no, it's been instrumental. I can't imagine the situation I would be in without you, Stacy.
Well, thanks.
And I mean that in court watchers and everybody else, and the emotional support, and just learning, right? That's what it's about. That's why we're here. It's about sharing our experiences, because nobody can tell you that you're wrong for your experience. What you experienced is yours. I can't tell you that it's wrong because you experienced it. And when we share these things and we have open dialogue and communication, that's really what makes an impact. And it's made an impact with me. And I hope my story makes an impact on other people so that they can learn. That's why I'm here. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be here as much as, I love speaking with you. This is hard for me. But if I don't speak out and I don't share this experience, then it was in vain. And I couldn't have done it without court watchers.
And I think you got more access as a result of court watchers, no? Or what do you think?
Absolutely. I think within the first 4 hours of speaking with court watchers, I fired my attorney and ended up negotiating an expanded visitation and access, which my former attorney told me that'll never happen. You don't have any leverage. Okay. Well, thank you, court watchers, because
And now
I
I think you're going into the appellate courts now too, possibly, right?
yeah, for about 5 different appeals, but yeah.
So, but you should watch and see how you do. And I
Yeah,
think in New York State, all appellate oral arguments uh, are webcast. So we'll be watching for you, and hopefully you do well with that, and get more access with your son.
that's all it's about. I'm gonna keep trying and trying and trying. Um, what kind of man would I be if I didn't? Right? I'm willing to sacrifice. I'm willing to suffer in this life, um, so that my son can have a normal life when he gets older. And I'll do whatever I have to do. These things in life, houses, cars, money, they mean nothing to me, without my son.
All right. Well, thank you, Dennis. Thank you for sharing your story. I know you say every time you do talk about it, it takes a lot out of you, makes you
But
feel, certain ways. I thank you. I thank you for your son too, because I think that, and all the other children that you're helping too. And what I see of you, and when I see you do, I'm very proud of you as a father as well. So good
thank
luck
you,
with everything. And thanks again for your time.
thank you, Stacy, and thank you for giving me this platform and allowing me to share my story for others. And I just want to thank everybody out there for the support. I get letters, emails, phone calls, text messages, um, and anything that if I can help one person, it makes this terrible thing worth it. So I appreciate that, and thank you to your audience, and have a wonderful 4th of July. God bless America.
Yes, I was just going to say the same to you. Happy 4th.
Happy 4th.
All right. Take
See
care.
ya.